Hi everyone, and today I have the pleasure of looking at a famous legacy lens that was made and sold by Canon from 1989 until 1985, the EF 80-200mm f2.8L, popularly known as the Magic Drainpipe. You can find it nowadays over on eBay for about $600 or about £400 in the UK, and I got lucky with my copy. It only cost me £315, and for a lens like this in good condition, that was a bit of a bargain. When Canon changed to their new EF lens mount back in 1987, they were taking a huge gamble as it rendered all their older lenses worthless, which upset a lot of people. But this giant black L lens was one of a handful of exciting new optics that were responsible for Canon winning those photographers back to such an extent that they largely took over the market from Nikon. It gained instant popularity and respect among professionals for having sharpness as yet unseen on a zoom lens, for its rock-solid build quality, and for its fast autofocus system, which was a game changer for Canon, and over time, the Magic Drainpipe has become legendary. I wanted to see if all reports about its excellence really are true, so I found a copy to try out and test for you all. And aside from everything else, I enjoy testing out 70 or 80-200mm fast standard zoom lenses. They're so versatile and enjoyable to work with and give you images that really leap out at you. You get a bit of a telephoto zoom range, as you can see here, but also a wide maximum aperture of f2.8 for letting in lots of light and giving out of focus backgrounds, especially at 200mm. As an EF lens, it will still work on all Canon's digital and film SLR cameras made since 1987, full frame or APS-C, and it will also work on mirrorless cameras too, if you have the correct adapter for your camera system. Something to bear in mind though is that this lens won't work with Canon's telephoto extenders, either 1.4 times or 2 times. As you can see, its rear glass element comes out a bit too far for them. Also, it's much too old to have image stabilization, and also, unfortunately, Canon do not publish in-camera corrections for this lens, a real shame. Well, anyway, let's look at the build quality. This lens is heavy, weighing 1.4 kilos or almost 3 pounds, although that is pretty run-of-the-mill for a lens of this kind. Every bit of it, except the control rings, feel metallic and utterly solid, like some Victorian machinery cast out of iron. It could probably take a lot of abuse. It's based on a metal lens mount, unsurprisingly, but there's no weather sealing gasket there. The tripod collar is quite neat, a design I haven't seen before. You unscrew to loosen it, and then it pops open like a pair of handcuffs. Next, the zoom ring. It turns easily and evenly with a little bit of damping, but over time the zoom action on this lens has gotten slightly rougher, making mechanical sounds as it goes. Next, the focus ring. If the lens is switched to autofocus mode, then it turns freely and very smoothly. Switch the lens to manual focus mode and it turns about 90 degrees, a lot less smoothly. Still, it's easy to manually focus quite precisely. There are hard stops at either end of the distance scale, although you can force the focus ring past them if you're feeling brutal, not recommended. And now, the autofocus motor. Here it goes through the whole focus range. The old arc form drive motor is a little noisy, but pretty quick. Back in 1989, that was an amazingly fast performance. I also found that, on my Canon 6D, it focused consistently and accurately. It was pretty reliable. It really did not enjoy working in live view mode though. It would focus accurately there, but making a lot of noise. A couple of more technical bits here. The lens is parfocal, so the focus point remains the same if you zoom in and out, which is useful for video makers. Less useful is that the lens suffers from a little focus breathing, which means that as you change focus, the focal length zooms in and out a little bit. The cereal bowl shaped lens hood is a bit silly looking in my opinion and won't be as effective as more modern designs, but it clips on very easily, spinning around freely. The front filter thread is 72mm wide, a little smaller than the typical 77 that you see nowadays. All in all, the lens's build quality is just awesome, even if the technology inside it might be a little dated now. Alright, let's see about image quality. Now, I was going to show you test pictures from an APS-C camera and from my 20 megapixel full frame Canon 6D, but, spoiler alert, when I tested it out, adapted onto my full frame 42 megapixel Sony a7R II, the results were so surprisingly good that I felt there wasn't much need for the other two cameras' results. Let me show you what I mean. At 80mm and f2.8, even on a 42 megapixel full frame camera, the image quality is brilliantly sharp in the middle with very good contrast. There's just a touch of purple fringing visible here, typical for an older lens. The corner image quality is slightly softer but still very good, with some pink and green chromatic aberration. Stop down to f4 for a touch more sharpness and brightness in those corners, and back in the middle the purple fringing is gone. Stop down to f5.6 and those corners get a little better again, and f8, f11 and f16 are all really excellent. The only issue remaining is that chromatic aberration. Alright, let's zoom in halfway to about 135mm. At f2.8, image quality in the middle remains awesome. No purple fringing to be seen now. The corners are a little dark but still nicely sharp, and there's no colour fringing now. f4 is sharper and brighter, and so is f5.6, and when you stop down to f8 the quality is excellent, and finally f11 and f16 are both ridiculously sharp. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 200mm. At f2.8, in the middle of the image, we see slightly less resolution and contrast than before, but it's still very good, considering we're shooting on a 42 megapixel camera. The good news is that the corners are just as good, and again, there's no chromatic aberration. At f4, there's a sharpness boost in the corners, and the lens becomes extremely sharp again, back in the middle. At f5.6, the middle remains just as amazing, and the corners see another improvement, and they remain this good, stopped down to about f11. Stop down the aperture any further, and softness will creep in due to diffraction. Well, overall, for a fast aperture zoom lens designed in 1989, you can easily see why people were blown away by the Magic Drainpipe. In fact, film shooters probably never realised just how sharp it really is. Even on my demanding Sony a7R II camera, it had no problems producing consistently excellent resolution and contrast. This lens is a hidden gem. Of course, on a lower resolution full frame camera it'll be great, and on a 24 megapixel APS-C camera it'll remain fantastically sharp. Although at 200mm on APS-C you'll probably want to stop down to f4 for best results. Alright, vignetting and distortion on a full frame camera. At 80mm we see slight barrel distortion and very little vignetting. Those corners look fairly bright, but stop down to f4 or f5.6 for perfectly even illumination. If you zoom in halfway to 135mm, then that barrel distortion flips into very slight pincushion distortion, and vignetting gets a lot more noticeable at f2.8. Zoom all the way in to 200mm and that pincushion distortion remains, only slight, but vignetting at f2.8 is pretty bad now. It falls softly but significantly from the corners quite far into the middle. Stop down to f4 for far more brightness in the corners. Let's see about close-up image quality now. The lens's minimum focus distance is 1.8 meters, not good. Trying to take pictures of small subjects is kind of a pain. The good news though is that the image remains impressively sharp at f2.8 and at f4 perfectly sharp. Now, most telephoto lenses, particularly older ones, do not like being anywhere near bright lights, and the drain pipe loses a grip on its magic here. Its excellent contrast is quickly replaced by flaring and dullness, even if bright lights are only nearby. Use the lens hood whenever you can. Finally, bokeh. This lens can get you some really out of focus backgrounds quite easily. Not everyone is a fan of the bokeh on Canon's 70 to 200mm lenses, but I found the Magic Drainpipe's bokeh to be smoother than usual for this type of zoom lens. It's actually very nice and soft. Well, overall, you can see why this lens is legendary now. I was expecting it to be quite sharp, but not this good. Actually, I compared it to my copy of the 1995 edition white 70 to 200mm L lens, the version without image stabilization, which Canon still makes today, and the Magic Drainpipe was actually a little sharper. At 200mm, its corners were noticeably sharper. But is the old 80 to 200mm f2.8L worth getting today? Well, maybe. The very latest and most expensive 70 to 200mm lenses are noticeably sharper nowadays. In fact, even Tamron now make a slightly sharper equivalent lens, which even includes image stabilization. But the Magic Drainpipe was clearly over-engineered for its time, and it's sharp enough for just about any use, even today. And it's easily findable on eBay for only £350 to £400 or so, which is far, far less than even the newest Tamron lens I've just mentioned. So, in that respect, it's great value and very recommendable. But take note, 70 or 80 to 200mm zoom lenses are notorious for getting faults and problems over time, and Canon won't service this particular lens anymore. If it develops a fault, you'll have to find a really specialist repair team to get it going again, and even if they can, they'll charge you a lot of money. These lenses were real workhorses for the professional photographers who bought them, so make sure you get one that's not been too badly punished in its time. But if you want a nice piece of history and a very respectable lens for a decent price, then even 29 years down the line, the Magic Drainpipe could be for you.